Well, it's definitely been a while, but I'm finally sitting down to talk about our final remaining Legacy animated figure, at least so far. We can still pray for a lug nut. Looking back to the original debut of the animated universe and current chug, god, it makes so much sense that they went with Prowl. Yeah, there were other iconic characters from the show that were approached in different ways, or completely reimagined, but I think Prowl stood out to a lot of people as a highlight of the show. He certainly stood out to me. If you'd have asked little MrLoubat who his favourite Transformers character was, there was a good chance I'd have said Prowl. This guy really made an impact with the depth of his character, and his really interesting design. So, does Legacy Evolution Animated Universe Prowl live up to the character's roots? Also, United Chromia is here. Well, not to jump the gun with this particular release, but if every deluxe had this level of care put into it, there'd be no more war. The sculpted detail and proportions on this guy are stellar. He doesn't look quite as close to the show model as the other animated fellas from United, but this has most of the key details. The smooth, curved surfaces look incredibly sleek, and the important details like the large fender wings, shin wheels, and windscreen chest all look absolutely incredible. The only detail of the proportions I'm not so hot on are the overly rounded and wide hips. For the sake of the feel of the figure, they work, but I'm not the biggest fan of how they look on Prowl, but they do work a little better later. I really like the head on this guy. This kind of does the opposite to Optimus and Bumblebee, where the head is stylized like a G1 design, but then is given the proportions like an animated character, so his chin ends up making about 10% of his total height. This does work for me, but I know it was a bit of a controversial decision at the time. Still, even if the head isn't an ideal representation of Prowl's deadpan visage from the show, I still think it works with the design. The colours here work really well. The figure has a very simple colour palette, the black makes an excellent base for the smooth surfaces, and the gold does well to highlight some of the details. Not so sure about the tan though. It's a very fleshy shade, and the placement on the hands and the crotch exclusively makes him look kinda odd. What I'm getting at here is, well, he looks kinda kinky if you squint. Beyond that detail though, I haven't got much to complain about with this deco. The complaints I have mostly lie with the accessories. The outer portions of the shin wheels pop off, and automorph into some very swish ninja styles like in the show. That is a neat feature, but I have a couple of issues with its execution. For one thing, the automorph likes to get stuck. I've heard that this issue isn't limited to my copy, and it's present on both my Prowl and my Chromia, so that isn't great. And second, you may notice the lack of a peg on the weapons. Well, that is because you slot the shuriken into the hand by the blade. I don't love this connection. It does hold, but it's only present on the left hand, meaning the shurikens are limited to being wielded one at a time without having to balance them in his hands, and that means he can't use any other kind of accessory in that hand. I understand why this was approached this way, but I'm just not into it. And while I'm here bitching up a storm, I might as well mention he has no wrists. A little annoying, but forgivable considering the rest of this guy's impeccable posing. The head here is on an insanely unlimited ball joint. I haven't seen one this good since Commander Magnus. He's got fairly standard shoulders going out and around, bicep swivels, standard elbows, an ab crunch, hell yeah, a waist swivel, the absolute least encumbered hips I have ever seen on anything ever, a thigh swivel, some really deep knees, and a ball joint at the ankle that allows for a lot of movement. This guy doesn't really have too many specialty joints beyond that minor ab crunch, but the huge ranges of almost every joint really kick this guy up a notch, and make him one of the most dynamic deluxes of the last few years. Can't really say I have much praise for the transformation though. This is very well thought out, don't get me wrong. I really like the way the fenders swing around and the legs work pretty well, but the hand feel of this conversion is fucking atrocious, with basically one component having proper locking tabs that actually work, and all kinds of plastic flexing wank to get things situated in the end, leaving you with an alright bike mode. I'll say this now, the front portion of this bike is fantastic. The smooth headlight array and windscreen tapering down to the smooth fenders looks amazing, and the detailed handlebars and dials are a really nice touch, but the robot mode parts peeking through underneath the surface don't look even remotely good. All the gaps and the hollow parts are clear on display, there are ugly little brackets on the sides. At least it has the decency to have a kickstand so it can actually stand up. But unfortunately, the arms don't like to stay tabbed together and the wheels get caught up on the shurikens trying to open themselves half the time, so there goes any credibility for that. This mode just feels like such a downer compared to the robot mode. Bike modes are always hit or miss with Transformers figures, and I don't really feel that they hit the mark with this one. It's passable at best, but a bit shit at worst. But honestly, I don't feel that drags down the figure too much. And even then, what few robot mode shortcomings there were are mostly negated in my books with Legacy United Cyberverse Universe Chromia. This is an inspired redeco of Legacy Prowl, with the only sculpting change being the new head, which has gotta be the best one Chromia has ever had. While she's not quite the spitting image of her Cyberverse self, this does work really well, especially in those gorgeous colours, with 4 really great shades of blue and highlights of red, along with some excellent paintwork spicing things up, and the wide hips and slender physique really lend themselves to a female character, and the bike mode works a little better for me than Prowl's does, with the blue striping bumping up the light bike feel and completely changing the vibe of the mode, even though those ugly robot innards are still there. And while not a perfect representation of Cyberverse Chromia, this is a really great Chromia for generations. When a mold gets reused like this, it can very quickly become a point of contention for some folks, and I really don't see why. Sure, This is missing some details to be a Cyberverse Chromia. There are a couple of features that are similar but not quite enough to call them anything more than influenced by that design, but does that detract from the figure at large? Hell no. This thing wears its mold better than Prowl, and this might be the best Chromia of all time. I definitely can't see it being beaten by the Siege one, that's for sure. Overall, I'd recommend both of these figures very highly. Sure, there are some issues with the accessories, and I'm not a huge fan of the bike modes, but the robot modes are both incredible. Enough so that I think the issues could be looked past with ease when considering forking out for these two.